Welcome to the deep dive. Today, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are standing inside this timeless, physically impossible ballroom. It is suspended in like an endless twilight.
Wow. Right, just a really striking image right out of the gate.
Exactly. And trapped inside this space, locked in what seems to be an eternal philosophical debate, are three of history's absolute greatest composers. You have Johann Strauss II, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and Dmitri Shostakovich.
Which is just a wild lineup of minds to put in one room.
Oh, totally. And they are surrounded by an unseen orchestra playing a waltz that never actually stops. And watching over this entire scene, sitting completely motionless in the shadows, is a silent judge.
Yeah, the aesthetic alone feels so mythological. It's like a fever dream you just can't quite shake when you wake up.
Right, and that lingering mythological feeling is really the entire foundation of the material we are diving into today. We are exploring a brilliantly layered, extended one-act philosophical play called The Turning Measure.
Such a great title.
It really is. It was posted today, April 24th, 2026, by Farid Novin on the blog Plays and Philosophy. And we aren't here to simply, review a play. We are going to use this fascinating text as a lens to look at human resilience, how we perceive the crushing rate of time, and ultimately how we manage to find any sort of meaning when we are, well, forced to dance to music we didn't write.
And certainly didn't choose. I mean, to properly ground ourselves before stepping onto that impossible dance floor, we really have to examine the two epigraphs the playwright uses to open the piece.
Yeah, they're so important.
They function as a compass for the entire debate that follows. So, the first is a classic observation from Mozart, stating that music is not in the notes, but in the silence between them.
Which is a beautiful sentiment, right? But placing it next to the second quote completely changes the context.
Oh, it shifts the tone immediately.
Yeah.
Because the second quote is from the 19th century Blackfoot warrior chief, Crowfoot. He compares life to the brief flash of a firefly in the night, or, the little shadow which runs across the grass and loses itself in the sunset.
Yeah, that's incredibly heavy.
It is. The text is deliberately asking you to hold two drastically opposing ideas in your mind at the same time. You have the highly structured, intentional, elite European silence of Mozart's art on one hand, and then the messy, fleeting, almost accidental flash of human survival on the other.
Okay, let's unpack this, because from those incredibly ethereal high art concepts, the play just drops us straight into a very physical, very heavy setting.
Yeah, the ballroom.
Right. The stage directions describe a ballroom with no walls, suspended in a void. And the architecture that is present is this bizarre mashup of Viennese elegance, Petersburgian grandeur, and rigid Soviet brutalism, all just collapsing into a single room.
I mean, think about what those architectural styles actually represent, both physically and psychologically.
Oh, absolutely.
Viennese elegance is all about ornate escapism. Crystal chandeliers, gilded mirrors, a society trying to float above its own decay. And then Petersburgian grandeur carries the immense, overwhelming weight of imperial history and aristocratic expectation.
Right, right.
And then Soviet brutalism is just massive slabs of unyielding concrete. It is the literal physical manifestation of a crushing, inescapable state apparatus. And all three realities exist simultaneously in this room.
Yeah. And the text even notes that the chandeliers hover in midair, constantly flickering, and the floor itself is made of polished obsidian that is literally warped at the edges.
Which is such a cool detail.
It's as if time has passed unevenly over the surface of the room, just melting it. And filling this entire warped space is the unseen orchestra playing a waltz that keeps reshaping itself to fit those three architectural eras.
Yeah.
So this is the environment where our three composers make their entrances, immediately arguing about a fundamental question, which is, why do we dance?
Which serves as a brilliant proxy for asking why we do anything at all.
Yeah,
I mean, their answers align perfectly with who they were and how they survived historically.
Yeah, they really do.
Like Johann Strauss enters the stage literally dancing. He argues that the world endures on a simple three-beat rhythm, 1, 2, 3. For him, motion is joy. It is ultimate liberation.
But then Tchaikovsky enters slowly, almost hesitant. His perspective couldn't be further from joy.
Not at all.
He argues that motion isn't freedom, it's a grim necessity. We dance because we are always falling, and dancing is simply learning how to fall with grace. He actually tells the room, I simply learned to fall in 3-4 times.
Wow. And finally, we get to Shostakovich.
Right.
And he doesn't even enter the scene. He is already seated, completely motionless, as if he's just accepted a terrible fate.
Right.
He looks at the endless waltz and says, do not mistake endurance for choice. For Shostakovich, the waltz isn't joy, and it certainly isn't grace. It is an inescapable, predictable, rigid structure forced upon them.
You know, reading their three perspectives, I kept thinking about them as different reactions to the law of gravity.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like they're all dealing with the exact same inescapable physical law, but experiencing it entirely differently. Strauss believes the waltz is a kind of magic that lets you defy gravity and fly above the ballroom. Tchaikovsky acknowledges that gravity is inevitable and you are going down, but he thinks the waltz is the parachute that makes your fatal drop look beautiful.
And Shostakovich.
Shostakovich is just sitting in his chair pointing out that gravity is an invisible prison. Whether you are delusionally flapping your arms thinking you're flying or pulling a ripcord to fall gracefully, you have absolutely no choice in the matter. You are just a prisoner submitting to a law.
What's fascinating here is how each of those views of a simple 1-2-3 step reflects their historical survival mechanisms.
Yeah, the context is everything.
Exactly. Strauss was the waltz king of Vienna. His entire livelihood depended on entertaining a high society that desperately wanted to float above its mounting political problems. Shostakovich survived two terrifying murderous Soviet regimes by hourly complying with their rigid artistic demands.
Just trying to stay alive.
Right. But it is Tchaikovsky who locates the actual human element inside all of this mechanical structure.
Wait, what does Tchaikovsky mean when he talks about the hesitation? I always thought a waltz had to be perfectly mechanically timed to work.
In a purely mechanical sense, yes, a waltz is a strict 1-2-3. But Tchaikovsky points out that the real humanity in a waltz isn't the physical step itself. It exists in the tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation before the second beat.
Oh, I see.
In musical terms, this is called rubato, the slight pushing and pulling of the tempo by the performer. That fraction of a second of stolen time is where a human being actually draws breath, feels doubt, and makes the active decision to keep going. We don't exist in the mechanical motion of the gear turning. We exist in the hesitation.
That is just incredible. And, you know, if you are forced to use a waltz to survive an endless, inescapable reality, it is going to completely alter how you experience the passage of time.
Absolutely.
Because they all acknowledge they are caught in this rhythm, the debate naturally evolves into a discussion on coping mechanisms. Tchaikovsky argues for a very cyclical view of time. He claims time doesn't pass in a straight line, it just circles back on itself.
Yeah, that repetition.
Right, we keep returning to the same conversations, the same exact losses. We are essentially born mid-step, the music is already playing, and we spend our lives inventing retroactive reasons for why we started moving in the first place.
He frames that endless repetition beautifully, though. Tchaikovsky suggests there is an extraordinary mercy built into consciousness.
The mercy.
Yeah, it is the psychological illusion that allows us to experience the 700th repetition of something mundane, like waking up on a Tuesday, or feeling a familiar pang of longing, as if it were completely new.
Oh, wow.
If the human brain felt the full, accumulated weight of that infinite circle every single time we repeated a day, it would just crush our minds. The illusion of a fresh beginning is a profound mercy.
But then Shostakovich immediately strips away that romanticism. Where Tchaikovsky sees a gentle mercy, Shostakovich sees a brutal, mandatory survival mechanism.
He really does.
Mistaking Tuesday for something new isn't a quirk of consciousness for him. He shares this incredibly chilling memory in the play, stating flatly, "I have mistaken Tuesday for a sentence." He talks about the terror of knocking on doors and not opening them.
Yeah, that line is haunting.
It is. Performing the illusion of newness and routine was required to stay alive when he was sitting in his apartment, literally waiting to be disappeared by the secret police.
And you hear the sheer weight of these different survival strategies when the unseen orchestra suddenly fractures and begins playing their 3 specific waltzes.
Oh, I loved this part.
Right. Strauss gets this golden, forgiving, lush Viennese melody. Tchaikovsky's waltz is incredibly beautiful but deeply shadowed. It carries a sense of tragedy specifically because it completes itself. And Shostakovich's waltz is described as rigid, grotesque, and totally obedient.
I have to say, I found myself genuinely frustrated with Strauss during this part of the debate.
Really? Why is that?
Well, isn't his perspective just aggressively naive? I mean, he is spinning around a ballroom talking about the joyous liberation of the waltz, while Shostakovich is over there dealing with the terrifying reality of elegant compliance to a regime that might execute him at any moment.
Yeah, I can see that.
Strauss seems like he is just burying his head in the sand.
It is entirely natural to want to dismiss Strauss as a frivolous escapist, but the playwright handles that exact tension masterfully. Shostakovich actually intervenes to defend the nuance of what Strauss is doing.
Wait, he defends him.
He does. Shostakovich argues that all music, even joyous music, functions as resistance. When discussing his own obedient, rigid waltz, Shostakovich explains that the true danger lies in sounding acceptable. To the state censor listening to the recording, his waltz sounds like he is following all the rules.
But how does he manage to hide his resistance inside music the state has already approved?
He manipulates the musical mechanics themselves. He explains that his harmony is intentionally fractured. He uses the exact upbeat major key notes the state requires for a happy waltz, but he writes them for instruments pushed to their absolute highest, most unnatural and strained registers.
Oh, brilliant.
The joy literally sounds like it is being forced out of the instruments under threat. He describes it as a smile built from the exact same materials as a grimace.
A smile built from the same materials as a grimace. That is just a haunting way to describe survival.
It really is.
Yeah.
And an ordinary observer who hasn't been watched by people with the power to erase them won't notice the strain. But someone who has been truly watched will hear nothing else but roaring defiance.
Wow.
And because Shostakovich understands that deep level of encoded resistance, he validates Strauss's joy. He tells Strauss that choosing to make the cage beautiful allows the prisoner inside to hear something the jailer never intended. Refusing to let the crushing reality of the world extinguish your joy is a profound act of defiance against a universe that is largely indifferent to human feelings.
That defense brings us to a really heavy realization about guilt. Because if art, or just our daily work, is a form of resistance within whatever cage we find ourselves in, what is our responsibility to the people around us who are suffering?
That's the big question.
Right. And Strauss eventually breaks down under the weight of his own legacy. He feels this massive, paralyzing guilt, admitting that while he was conducting these beautiful, sparkling dances in Vienna, people were starving and suffering in the next street or the next country over. He fears his entire life's work was nothing but a cowardly evasion.
But Shostakovich flatly refuses to let him wallow in that historical guilt. Shostakovich responds, "No, we were placed."
We were placed.
None of them chose their historical moments or their governments. Shostakovich points out the harsh truth that suffering does not pause to appreciate beauty, but beauty also does not pause out of respect for suffering. They are always occurring simultaneously. You simply have to use the position and the tools history hands you.
And Tchaikovsky reveals his own deep personal suffering at this point, right? He talks about being handed an interior country that his exterior country wouldn't permit him to inhabit.
Yes.
He is referencing the reality of his homosexuality in 19th century Russia. He poured his life into writing music about longing for a home and a kind of love that he was only allowed to express within the safety of certain chords.
This vulnerability leads to what might be the defining thesis of the entire play.
Mm-hmm.
Strauss looks at Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich and says, "I gave people beauty." And Shostakovich replies, "You give people beauty, we give people company."
So what does this all mean?
It's so profound.
It is. I mean, if you've ever gone through a devastating loss or found yourself in a period of profound depression, you know exactly what this distinction feels like. When you are sitting in the absolute dark, you do not want someone to put on a cheerful pop song.
No, not at all.
You don't want someone trying to pull you out of it with beauty. You need a sad song to sit in the dark with you. You need company. You need the auditory proof that someone else has survived the exact same agonizing isolation you are experiencing right now and managed to make something out of it.
Exactly.
We need the joyous escapism of Strauss to remind us what light looks like. But we need the company of Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich to survive the dark.
They serve equally vital functions for the human spirit. And Tchaikovsky elevates this entire concept by redefining what courage actually means in the face of all this inevitable suffering.
How does he define it?
He argues that courage is not blind optimism. Courage is the willingness to be moved by something you know will end.
Wow. So, you choose to love someone fully knowing they will eventually be gone.
Yes, you step onto the floor and dance, fully knowing the song has a final measure. This definition of courage triggers Strauss's final realization about the fate of the ordinary person.
He finally gets it.
He finally understands the assignment. He realizes the ordinary person dances anyway, knowing their legs will eventually fail, knowing the music will end, not because they think the universe is fundamentally just or fair, but simply because the music is playing.
Because the music is playing, it is an active, defiant surrender to the present moment. But, throughout this intense, sweeping debate about time, resistance, and the purpose of art, we haven't touched on the entity weighing every single argument.
We haven't.
We have to look at the only character in the play who never utters a single syllable.
The judge.
Yeah.
Sitting downstage right at a small table.
Yeah, she is dressed entirely in charcoal. Resting on her table is a glass of water, a closed leather ledger she never bothers to open, and a single unlit candle.
And the playwright's dramaturgical notes are incredibly explicit about her identity. She is not a personification of death. The playwright notes that making her death would be far too easy, too cliché. She represents consequence. She is the terrifying understanding that all of our human elegance, all of our brilliant philosophical arguments and historical justifications will eventually be weighed against an absolute force that simply does not respond to human rhetoric.
And her silence just dominates the room. The stage notes suggest her silence argues much more forcefully against the elegance of the composers than any speech ever could. Throughout the entire play, she only makes 3 barely perceptible movements.
Just tiny shifts.
Yeah. For example, she slightly lifts her chin when Shostakovich asks aloud if his lifelong endurance was actually human or just an automatic reflex. She doesn't offer an answer or comfort, she merely registers the immense weight of the question.
And she becomes the focal point of the play's resolution. In the final scene, the unseen orchestra fades, and the 3 composers move to a slightly out-of-tune domestic upright piano. They sit together and begin to improvise a single piece.
All 3 of them.
Yeah, Tchaikovsky plays a tender, searching melody, Strauss adds a gentle, floating counterline, and Shostakovich anchors it with a mechanical, sardonic bass line underneath.
So they're playing 3 completely different truths at the exact same time. It isn't perfectly resolved, but it is harmonious.
Right.
The music slows down, but it refuses to stop. It just continues echoing in the void. Shostakovich speaks the final line of the play, observing the room and stating, "Even silence has a rhythm."
That is the exact moment. The judge finally stands up. She places her hand flat on the closed ledger. She looks at all 3 composers simultaneously, and then she picks up the unlit candle.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when we imagine a judge in any narrative, we expect a definitive action. We expect them to bang a heavy gavel, or shine a blinding spotlight on the ultimate truth, or declare a clear winner.
But not this judge.
No. She just holds the unlit candle for a moment, sets it back down on the table without ever lighting it, and sits back down in the shadows. I mean, think of her like a black hole at the center of a massive galaxy.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
A black hole doesn't need to emit light or declare its presence to control the space around it. It absorbs everything, it says absolutely nothing, and yet it holds an entire swirling ballroom of stars in a perfect, inescapable orbit purely through the sheer gravity of its existence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the play's themes, the playwright leaves a specific note explaining the mechanics of that candle. The unlit candle is not meant to be a symbol of despair or cosmic hopelessness.
What is it then?
It is a symbol of absolute restraint. It represents a profound tact. It is the universe's quiet acknowledgement that some darkness should not be artificially illuminated. It tells us that sometimes the most important resonant judgments are the ones we purposefully choose never to pronounce aloud.
Restraint. Choosing to let the candle remain unlit even when you have the match right in your hand. It is an incredibly heavy thought to walk away with.
It really is.
And it brings this entire journey full circle. We started by analyzing the simple 1, 2, 3 steps of a waltz, and these 3 brilliant minds debating whether motion is an act of joy, a grim necessity, or pure obedience. We navigated through the realization that life is really about finding a way to dance gracefully inside whatever bizarre cage history happens to hand you.
Yeah.
Whether you use your specific dance to create beautiful escapism for others or to offer them vital company in the dark.
It leaves you with something very tangible to consider in your own life. Think back to that opening quote from Mozart, the idea that the truest music lives in the silence between the notes.
Right, the space in between.
Now combine that with the judge's ultimate act of restraint at the end of the play. We live in an incredibly noisy, relentless world. You are constantly pressured to speak up, to form an immediate opinion, to cast judgment, to light every single candle and aggressively expose every corner of the room.
Yeah, all the time.
But what if your most powerful defining choice today isn't what you loudly declare? What if the most profound thing you can do is hold the unlit candle, exercise restraint, and carefully consider the rhythm of the silence you choose to leave behind?